Hello, so this is my World War II Battle of Stalingrad, or depicting what would be a part of the Battle of Stalingrad. This is based on the events described in my book for my project, Stalingrad, by Anthony Beaver. This is my creative project. So this is a Lego representation of the 1942 winter, near Stalingrad, to the slightly to the west of Stalingrad. So this would be during Christmas time, and this would be an average German camp, where the Germans just live, and then just from here they would get transported east to the city itself to fight the Soviets. So this battle lasted from around fall, early fall of 1942 to early spring of 1943, just about. So this was during Christmas. So everything here kind of means something and was described in the book. Kind of has a story behind it. So at the time, during 1942, Christmas of 1942, the Germans were already starting to lose, because that was a little past the middle of the battle, past mid-battle already. It was going to finish soon because it finished in early spring. So yeah. So what happened was, in the beginning of the war, in the beginning of the battle, the Germans were doing really well. They were constantly trapping the Soviets and capturing lots of them. But towards the end of the battle, it started happening to them. So the 6th Army and part of the 4th Panzer Army, which were the 2 armies sent to Stalingrad to conquer it, became trapped, and these were thousands and thousands of soldiers, which would be crushing defeat for them if they did lose, which they did. So at this time, the Germans already knew they were surrounded, but they still thought that German high command would find a way to extract them out of there and to get them back to safety. And the only mode of transportation back to the Germany, I guess, or back to the rear lines of the German lines, would be by aerial transport. So here, they thought that they were still going to be saved, but German high command knew that most likely they were trying to save them, but they knew that they most likely wouldn't be able to get them out of there. So, but they hadn't told them that yet. They were saving for after Christmas, so that the soldiers would be kind of happy during Christmas, and then realize what was going to happen. So yeah. So here, oops. Yeah. Okay. So here an officer is talking with his second in charge, I guess. So although there was kind of a brief peace period around Christmas time between the Germans and the Soviets, there was still fighting going on, so everybody was still on high alert. So these two are just discussing what's going on, and they're wondering about what's going to happen to them. Like if the Soviets are going to continue squeezing them in until they capture all of them, which is what happened in the end. Most of them all surrendered. Most of all the Germans surrendered. And then here we have a soldier tending to his horse, which at that point was kind of the only real effective mode of transportation, because for tanks and trucks the engines had frozen. They had to be blowed out, or it actually says one instance they had to light a fire underneath the engine just to unfreeze it. And there wasn't much fuel, there wasn't much supplies at all. So horses were, although they required food, which was also scarce, they were better than trucks because they could still move. So horses is mainly what they use. Horse pulled wagons and such. So that's what's going on here. That's what that's representing. Here we have a guy chopping wood, because it's pretty much all they had. There were trees farther back into the areas that Germans had already captured, and there were trees, but most of them had already been cut and readied for the army to use. So this guy's just making them into smaller pieces to be used for firewood to warm themselves up. Here we have two Germans warming up their hands next to this fire in a trash can, I guess. Well, they couldn't put it on the ground because there was snow on the ground, so they had to put in something to hold it from the snow, or else the fire would be put out. So anyways, so they were just trying to keep themselves warm because it was an average freezing Russian winter. So, and they're kind of guarding this stockpile of weapons. So we have artillery shells in this crate, helmet on it, rifles, a couple more rifles here, and then underneath the rifles, if I can take them off, there's some ammunition for all the guns. And then in this one we got a Panzerfaust, as well as some grenades in the bottom. At the bottom. Let's go here, I guess. So here we have German radio and soldiers listening to it, and well, this weird thing here, it looks weird because it's supposed to be a wooden Christmas tree, which they didn't have actual pine trees available to them, and because most of them had been already cut and readied for them, so they couldn't go get a fresh one, or they didn't have plastic ones, of course. So they just carved them out of the wood that they had, and then, of course, later they would be used for firewood, because it would be a waste just to use it for a Christmas tree. But they wanted to kind of bring back the holiday feeling of Christmas, so that's what they're trying to do. And so back to this radio. So the Germans were just waiting and trying to hear from German High Command what was going to happen with them. They were just eagerly awaiting their for them to be evacuated from there, because there were soldiers dying of the cold, frostbite, on the front, so they were getting cut down quickly. So they're listening to the radio. Also, that day, the song Silent Night was put on the radio, was broadcasted on the radios of the army. So that's also what they were listening to at the time. Then here, there's a bunch of Soviets. Let me just zoom out. There's a bunch of Soviets here in a line because, despite being Christmas and everybody's happy, well, at least as close to happy as they can be in war, they're the standard rules and actions still applied, and they still had to do the same thing, which was to fight the enemy, which didn't change at all. So here the Germans have some Soviet prisoners of war marching away from the camp. And a notable thing about the Germans was that they took too many prisoners. And although they hardly gave them any food or used anything for them or gave them anything, they still, it added up, so they still ended up using a lot, and there wasn't as much left for the soldiers, so that was a big problem that they had. They still kept doing it. Here, kind of hard to see. Let me just spin all the way around. Okay. And then, sorry, it's a bit hard to see. So we have a soldier there, a Soviet soldier, who's kind of getting beaten up by the German guards, and he's scared, of course. You can see on his face. So the Germans were kind of exacting their revenge on the prisoners that they had, because they were trapped and they were upset at them. So, yeah. So that's what's going on there. He's being threatened to be killed because he has a gun in his face. And then here, this is described quite a bit in the book. That, oops, over here, bit hard to see again. If I go like this. Okay. So, these little squares that the Germans here are holding are supposed to represent, chocolate, because it was noted that one officer gave away a whole bar of chocolate that he had received from home, to boost morale, I guess. And the whole bar was a lot for what they received, and because there was little food anyways. So now the soldiers are just splitting it up between them around their makeshift wooden Christmas tree. So trying to still be kind of happy. And then here, there was a lot of dead and wounded who were just left there to die, pretty much, because there was no way they could take care of them. The air transports were reserved for supplies mainly, and for transporting higher ranking officers. Some wounded, but some of them never even... Well, there was so little space on the planes that they couldn't really get many there, so most were just dragged away to field hospitals where they were cared for as best they could. So here a soldier has been wounded in the leg, and his friend is just dragging him away, trying to help him. And then last thing here. So, as I said, the Germans were trapped, and they were losing men quickly, and through the horrors of war, some were just too affected by it that they couldn't handle it. So, popular way, I guess, to put them out of their sorrow was to commit suicide. So here, one of the German soldiers is trying to decide what to do with himself, and he's thinking about shooting himself. So that's what it came down to for a lot of soldiers, because that's how bad morale was. That a lot of soldiers did do that during that Christmas. So officers didn't like it, of course. They would stop them if they saw them, but their fellow soldiers understood what they were trying to do, and it would be the best for them, so they just left them alone. That's why there's nobody near him. So that's it. And this may look like just a whole bunch of minifigures on a plate, but it's kind of not. Not only did the minifigures have meaning to what they're doing, but also this sliver of green underneath, that shadow is kind of green on the bottom as well. That's the base. So then from that built up is this gray, which looks like another base, but it's only gray on the outside to make it look nicer. If I were to flip it all the way around over here, it's actually kind of a honeycomb pattern underneath to hold up all the white snow and everything else that's there. And I use colorful bricks that aren't useful anyway, so that's what I use for the bottom. So the underneath is a lot more complicated than what's on top. I could pull off a piece of this here. Maybe. No, it's a bit hard to do. It's hard to pull off one of the pieces, but if I were to pull up one of these squares here, you would see it's hollow, but also has some framework underneath, mostly hollow though. So yeah, and then by doing that, I also was able to achieve this change in texture and height in the ground. So there's this hill here. This is the highest point on the model. So we have some colored bricks underneath this here as well. And there's plenty of small hills and bumps all over. And because it's somewhat hollow underneath, and because of that pattern that holds up the rest of the snow around, this area, it might look like just a hole, but if I do this, it's just reflecting. I guess it kind of adds to the effect of what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be a frozen pond, because all the water froze, of course. So the reflection not only adds to kind of what the soldier is going through, just looking at himself in the water and just thinking about himself, but also adds to the effect of the ice, which came out pretty nice. And this jagged edge effect, because of that honeycomb pattern, also gave it that effect. So that's it. Thank you for watching, and yeah, that's the creative part of my independent reading project on the book Stalingrad.